I've lived in the same suburban neighborhood for almost 15 years. When I first moved in, the community looked like the perfect little slice of American life: neat lawns, white fences, kids riding their bikes down the street, and neighbors waving at each other on Saturday mornings. But as time passed, that picture-perfect charm was replaced by something much darker: the homeowners association. Now, don't get me wrong, when I bought the house, I knew there was an HOA. They promised it was there to protect property values and maintain community standards. In reality, it turned into a group of power-hungry neighbors with too much time on their hands and too little common sense. They fined people for the smallest, most ridiculous things you could imagine. I'd seen my neighbors ticketed for leaving their trash cans at the curb for an extra 2 hours. I'd seen families threatened with liens on their homes because they planted the wrong kind of flowers in their garden. And I'd even heard of one poor guy being fined because the paint on his shutters was fading unevenly. So, when a letter showed up in my mailbox with a $5 fine for failure to edge the sidewalk grass evenly, I wasn't surprised. Annoyed? Yes. Surprised? No. I laughed when I opened it. $5. The postage they spent to send me the notice cost nearly as much as the fine itself. I tossed the letter on the kitchen counter and thought, this is the kind of nonsense I'm not wasting my energy on. But if there's one thing I underestimated, it's just how far these HOA bullies were willing to go. The calm before the storm. At that time, my son had just returned home from years of serving overseas. He wasn't just any soldier, he was special forces. He'd seen more action than most people could stomach even hearing about. The things he'd been through hardened him, sharpened him, but they also gave him a sense of calm and control that most people never achieve. When he came back home, he decided to take some time off: no job, no rushing back into civilian life, just a break to breathe and recover. He was staying with me for a few months while he figured out his next steps. Having him in the house was a blessing. He was quiet, respectful, and honestly, I slept better at night knowing he was under the same roof. What I didn't know at the time was that his presence would soon turn what could have been a disaster into one of the most unforgettable confrontations our neighborhood had ever seen. The HOA escalates. A week after ignoring the silly $5 fine, another letter arrived. This time, it was less polite. They called me non-compliant and warned that continued failure to meet HOA obligations would result in enforcement actions. I shook my head. Enforcement actions, over $5? Ridiculous. I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the trash. Life's too short to let nosy neighbors dictate how you mow your grass. But apparently, they took my silence as a declaration of war. The following week, while I was at work, my son called me. "Dad," he said in that calm, steady voice of his, "some guys came by the house today." "What guys?" I asked. They said they were with the HOA's enforcement committee. Dressed in uniforms, cheap knockoffs, but they wanted to look official. They asked if you were home. I told them you weren't, and they left. But they weren't exactly friendly. I could practically feel my blood pressure rising through the phone. Uniforms? You're telling me the HOA sent their little neighborhood goon squad to the house? Pretty much, he replied. They called themselves compliance officers. One of them even had a fake badge clipped to his belt. I didn't say anything, just watched them leave. I groaned. All this over $5? Looks like it, he said flatly. At that moment, I thought the situation would fizzle out on its own. Maybe they were just bluffing. Maybe they wanted to intimidate me into paying up. But what happened next made me realize just how far these people were willing to take their abuse of power. The break-in. It was a Friday night when it happened. I was out late with some friends, leaving my son at home. Around 10 o'clock, he called me again. Only this time, his voice wasn't calm, it was edged with a seriousness that immediately put me on alert. "Dad," he said, "the HOA guys are here again. But this time, they are not knocking." "What do you mean, they are not knocking?" I asked, my heart starting to pound. "They are trying to break in." I froze. "You've got to be kidding me." "Nope," he said. "Two of them are at the back door right now. They've got flashlights. I can hear them fiddling with the lock. They are saying something about forced entry for compliance inspection." I pulled my car over to the side of the road, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "Don't do anything crazy," I said. "I'm heading home right now." There was a pause on the line. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Don't worry about me, Dad. I've handled worse than this." And that was the beginning of a night none of us in that neighborhood would ever forget. The HOA cops thought they were about to scare a homeowner into submission over a $5 fine. Instead, they were about to come face to face with a man trained to handle real combat, someone who had stared down enemies far more dangerous than a couple of wannabe enforcers with fake badges. They had no idea whose house they were breaking into. And they were about to regret it. Inside the house, my son moved like a shadow. Years of training kicked in the moment he realized the intruders weren't just knocking, they were trying to force their way inside. He'd been in this situation before, though never in a quiet suburban living room with family photos on the wall and a golden retriever curled up on the rug. Still, danger was danger, and he treated it like any other hostile encounter. The first sound he heard was the scrape of metal against the back door lock. A cheap lock, sure, but not easy to break without tools. They were clearly prepared. "Keep the flashlight steady," one of them muttered outside. "We'll be in and out before he knows it." The other snorted. "It's $5. Why doesn't he just pay?" "Because he thinks he's above the rules," the first one hissed. "We'll show him what happens when people think they can ignore compliance." My son crouched low near the doorway, listening. His mind was calm, deliberate. He could have called the police, but he knew the cops in this county were friendly with the HOA board. By the time they arrived, these men would have already been inside, rifling through private property. No. This was going to be handled now. First contact. The lock finally gave with a faint click. The back door creaked open, and two men in dark polo shirts and cargo pants stepped inside. They looked like bargain bin security guards, flashlights, radios clipped to their belts, and one even had a fake badge pinned to his chest. "Compliance inspection in progress," one whispered, as though that made the break-in legal. They moved cautiously down the hall, scanning the living room. They didn't see my son at first. He was pressed against the wall, perfectly still, like he used to do during raids overseas. Then, when they passed by him, he stepped out of the shadows. "Evening, gentlemen," he said calmly. The two jumped so hard one nearly dropped his flashlight. "Who the hell are you?" the first one barked. "I live here," my son replied. "Well, temporarily. My father owns this house." The second one straightened up, trying to act authoritative. "This is an HOA compliance matter. Step aside and let us conduct our inspection." My son tilted his head, unimpressed. "You broke into a private home at night, and you think you're doing an inspection? That's called burglary." The first man puffed up his chest. "We have authority from the HOA board. Your father has ignored repeated fines and warnings." My son let out a quiet laugh. "You're telling me you forced entry into a private residence over a $5 fine?" They didn't like being mocked. The second one stepped forward, squaring up. "Listen, kid. That was his first mistake. In one fluid motion, my son grabbed the man's wrist, twisted it behind his back, and shoved him against the wall. The flashlight clattered to the floor. The guy yelped like a scared animal. The first intruder stumbled back, wide-eyed. Hey, hey. Easy. We're just doing our job. Your job, my son growled, tightening his grip. Your job is trespassing. And if I were less patient, your job would be calling an ambulance right now. The standoff. The pinned man struggled, gasping. You can't, this is assault. We're officers of the HOA. My son leaned close, his voice low and cold. You're not officers. You're thugs with clipboards. Don't test me. The first guy raised his hands, trying to de-escalate. Look, maybe we started off wrong. Just let us finish the inspection, and we'll be out of your hair. My son narrowed his eyes. You're not finishing anything tonight. At that moment, their radios crackled. A third voice came through. Unit 1, status check. Are you inside? The first guy fumbled for his radio. Yeah, we're, conducting inspection. My son snatched the radio out of his hand before he could say more. He clicked the button and spoke in a tone so steady it sent chills through them. Inspection's over. Pull your people back, or things are about to get very uncomfortable. Silence on the other end. Then, who is this? My son smirked. The wrong guy to mess with. He tossed the radio onto the floor. Reinforcements arrive. From the corner window, he saw movement outside. 2 more men in the same cheap uniforms were approaching the house, one carrying a crowbar. They brought friends, my son muttered. The pinned man whimpered. They'll arrest you for this. You don't know who you're dealing with. Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with, my son said. He released the man's wrist, shoving him toward the back door. Get your buddies and leave before this gets ugly. But the 2 outside were already climbing onto the porch, pulling at the screen door. My son squared his shoulders, preparing for round 2. The call I'll never forget. Meanwhile, I was still on the road, weaving through traffic as fast as I dared without getting pulled over. My phone buzzed again. It was my son. Dad, he said, his voice steady, you might want to hurry. They're bringing in more. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Don't do anything crazy. Just stay safe. I'm almost there. He chuckled. Don't worry. Compared to where I've been, this is child's play. But deep down, I knew this was no laughing matter. The HOA had crossed a line that night. They weren't just writing fines or sending nasty letters, they were committing crimes. And they were doing it under the delusion that their little neighborhood authority gave them power. What they didn't realize was that they had just stepped into a battlefield they were hopelessly unprepared for. Because my son wasn't just defending a house, he was defending family. And that was something no fake badge or HOA bylaw could ever stand against. And so the stage was set. 4 intruders, 1 Special Forces veteran, and a neighborhood about to witness a showdown like none before. Part 3 would be the explosion, the clash between trained soldier and wannabe enforcers, and the fallout that shook the HOA to its core. The 2 men outside finally pried open the screen door, stomping onto the porch like they owned the place. The cheap crowbar glinted in the flashlight beam, and they carried themselves with the arrogance of men who thought the neighborhood gave them power. Inside, my son stood tall, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't scared. He was assessing. Calculating. Every movement, every sound outside, he measured and prepared for. The first 2 intruders, one still rubbing his wrist, the other clutching his dropped flashlight, were trapped between fear and pride. They wanted to show toughness, but the weight of my son's presence crushed them. "Call it off," my son ordered them. The guy with the sore wrist hissed back, "We can't. They'll keep coming until this inspection's done." "Then you're about to learn a hard lesson about inspections," my son said coolly. Breach. The porch door burst open. The two new arrivals stormed in, one swinging the crowbar against the floor for intimidation. "Compliance enforcement," one shouted. "Step aside." My son didn't flinch. He positioned himself between them and the hallway leading deeper into the house. "This is your last chance. Walk out now." The crowbar-wielding intruder sneered. "Or what? You'll fine us." My son moved before the words even settled in the air. In one lightning-quick motion, he grabbed the man's arm mid-swing, twisted the crowbar free, and shoved him backward into the wall so hard the drywall cracked. The man crumpled, gasping for breath. The others froze. Their bravado drained out of them the instant they saw how effortlessly he handled the weapon. "Next," my son asked, his voice low but steady. The remaining three exchanged uncertain glances. Their authority suddenly looked paper-thin under the weight of a man who had spent years dealing with real enemies, men with actual weapons, real training, and deadly intent. False courage. One of them tried to recover his confidence. "This is assault. You're going to jail." My son shook his head. "You broke into my father's home in the middle of the night with weapons. Do you really want the police here? Because I guarantee you, they won't be on your side when they see this mess." That shut him up quick. But still, the smallest of the group tried to puff up his chest, barking, "We're not leaving until we get what we came for." My son stepped closer, towering over him. "And what's that? $5? Or the illusion of power you don't actually have?" The smaller man swallowed hard, words failing him. "My arrival." At that exact moment, I screeched into the driveway, tires crunching over gravel. I jumped out of the car and sprinted to the front door, my heart hammering. When I stepped inside, the scene nearly knocked the wind out of me. My living room was chaos, two men cowering in the corner, one slumped against the wall groaning, and another standing frozen in front of my son, who now held the crowbar casually at his side like it was nothing more than a walking stick. "What the hell is going on here?" I roared. The first man pointed at me, his voice shaky but desperate. "Your son assaulted us. We're here on official HOA business." I cut him off, my voice louder. "Official business? You broke into my house. Over a $5 fine." Even in that moment, it sounded insane out loud. The showdown. The man who had been pinned earlier tried to regain some composure. "We warned you about ignoring fines. We told you there would be consequences. The board has full authority to enforce compliance." I stepped closer, jabbing a finger at him. "The board doesn't have authority to kick down doors. You people think you're the law, but you're just neighbors with clipboards playing dress-up." My son added, his tone like steel, "And if you don't leave right now, you're going to learn the difference between pretending to have authority and facing someone who actually knows how to enforce order." The room went silent. The only sound was the groaning of the man against the wall, still clutching his ribs where the drywall had cracked. Finally, one of them broke. "Let's go," he muttered. "This isn't worth it." The others hesitated, torn between pride and survival, but the truth was clear, they were beaten. Not physically, though some of them certainly felt it, but mentally. Their fake power had shattered under the weight of reality. Retreat. One by one, they shuffled toward the back door, heads down, mumbling excuses. "This isn't over," one tried to bluff as he limped out. "Yes, it is," my son shot back, his voice carrying finality. You step foot on this property again, and the only inspection you'll be getting is from the real police, when they haul you off in cuffs. They didn't answer. They just left, stumbling into the night, dragging their bruised egos and their broken sense of authority with them. Aftermath. When the door finally shut, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like an eternity. My hands were still shaking from adrenaline. My son set the crowbar on the table like he was putting down a coffee mug, then looked at me with that calm, unshaken expression only men like him can carry. You okay? He asked. I nodded. Better now. I can't believe they actually did this. Believe it, he said. And don't expect it to stop here. People drunk on power rarely back off after one failed attempt. He was right. I knew it. And as insane as it sounded, I realized then that this was only the beginning. The HOA had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and they weren't the type to let their pride stay buried. What they didn't understand, though, was that they had just declared war, and they picked the wrong house, the wrong family, and the absolute worst possible opponent in my son. The silence after they left was heavy. My son leaned back in a chair, calm as ever, while I paced the living room, still boiling with adrenaline. The drywall had a fist-sized dent, the back door lock was mangled, and my golden retriever peeked nervously out from under the table. This is insane, I muttered. Over a $5 fine. This looks like the aftermath of a robbery. My son crossed his arms. That's exactly what it was. Only difference is, these guys had the audacity to call themselves an HOA enforcement team. I nodded, fists clenched. Well, now they've got consequences coming their way. The police arrive. I called the sheriff's department. At first, I worried they'd side with the HOA, since they often rubbed elbows at community events. But when 2 deputies arrived and saw the damage for themselves, their attitudes shifted. Wait, you're telling me 4 men broke into your home, over a fine? One deputy asked, his brows raised. That's right, I said. They forced the door, assaulted my son, and threatened us with more inspections. The deputy shook his head in disbelief. That's not HOA enforcement. That's burglary, intimidation, and possibly impersonating law enforcement. My son, still calm, added, they had radios and fake badges. They called themselves compliance officers. The deputy's jaw tightened. Oh, they're done. Impersonating an officer is a felony in this county. He took our statements, documented the damage, and put out a bulletin to locate the 4 men. I could already imagine their faces when real police, not HOA wannabes, showed up at their doors. The HOA board meeting. 2 days later, I attended the next HOA board meeting. I wasn't planning to sit quietly, either. The room was packed with homeowners, many already frustrated with endless fines and rules. The board members sat at their long table up front, smug as always. But their confidence wavered when I walked in with 2 deputies at my side. I didn't waste time. Your so-called compliance team broke into my home Friday night, I announced. They damaged my property, threatened my family, and are now facing criminal charges. This is how you run a neighborhood. The room erupted. Neighbors gasped, whispered, and shouted over each other. One woman yelled, they tried to fine me for having pink curtains. Another man added, they threatened to tow my truck when it was parked in my own driveway. The board president, red-faced and sweating, stammered, that's not official HOA policy. The deputy beside me interrupted. We've already opened an investigation. The individuals involved will be charged. And if the board sanctioned this behavior, you can expect subpoenas too. That shut them up real quick. Neighbors take a stand. Word spread fast after the meeting. Suddenly, I wasn't the only one speaking out. Neighbors started digging through their old fine letters, sharing horror stories of intimidation, bogus fees, and harassment. It became clear that the compliance committee wasn't a rogue unit, it was the board's pet project. They had quietly approved it, hoping no one would question their authority. But after the break-in, their little empire collapsed. A petition circulated to remove the board. Within a week, more than 80% of the neighborhood had signed it. The board members were forced to resign under community pressure, and a special election was scheduled. The 4 fake officers arrested and charged with breaking and entering, impersonating law enforcement, and criminal mischief. I heard later that at least 2 of them took plea deals. A father's reflection. One night, after things calmed down, I sat on the porch with my son. We didn't talk much, just watched the quiet street. For the first time in years, it actually felt peaceful again. You know, I said finally, I don't think I've ever been prouder of you. Not for what you did to those guys, but for how you handled it. Calm. Controlled. You didn't lose your cool once. He shrugged modestly. That's training. And honestly, it wasn't much of a challenge. They were amateurs trying to act tough. I laughed. Still, you saved this family. You saved me. He glanced over at me, his expression softening. That's what family does. The resolution. In the months that followed, the neighborhood transformed. With the old board gone, new leadership brought in real fairness, actual maintenance of common areas, not harassment over lawn length. People smiled again, chatted across driveways, and kids rode bikes without their parents worrying about fines for leaving a toy on the lawn. And me. I framed that original $5 fine notice. Not out of anger, but as a reminder of just how far things spiraled because of it. It hangs in my office today with a sticky note attached, the fine that brought down the bullies. Every time I see it, I remember that night, the break-in, the fear, and my son standing like an immovable wall between chaos and safety. The HOA thought they had power. But they learned the hard way that paper rules and fake badges can't stand against real strength, real training, and above all, real family. Because when they broke into my house that night, they didn't just find a homeowner who refused to pay a fine. They found a warrior waiting inside.